Welcome to today's Explainer. Right now, we're pulling back the curtain on the true macroeconomic realities of global conflict. We're diving deep into some absolutely brilliant new analysis from the Macro Butler titled Mars and Mammon, the Cost of War. Now, I want you to forget the geopolitical headlines for just a minute. We're going to look strictly at the ledger. Because while all those headlines focus on the battlefield, the actual cost of war is quietly, relentlessly playing out right inside your portfolio, your savings, and your everyday purchasing power.
Okay, let's kick things off with this incredibly stark quote from military theorist Karl von Clausewitz. Peace is the budget, war is the overdraft, and the interest is always paid in someone's lifetime. We really need to reframe how we look at war right away. It's an economic event before it's a moral one. In fact, it's the most violent reallocation of wealth a state can ever attempt. You think the state writes the overdraft, but it's the private citizens, us, who are left paying the compounding interest.
So, to unpack all of this, here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, we'll cover the true cost of war, followed by history's merciless financial lessons and the 7 hidden invoices. Then we'll dive into the great wealth transfer, the illusion of wartime growth, and finally, wrap up with some concrete strategies for wealth preservation.
All right, Section 1, the true cost of war.
When you really examine conflict, you have to realize that there are 2 separate ledgers. The first one is written in blood, sure, but today we're focusing on the second one, treasure. As the analysis so powerfully points out, every war is paid twice. The tank is not the tractor. A fired artillery shell builds absolutely nothing. War literally takes accumulated generational treasure and turns it into smoke. It devours savings, seizes the workshop, and burns up the contracts of peace. The ultimate question for any wise investor to ask is simply this: who gets paid to make that smoke, and who is left to breathe it? Well, the state always ensures the private saver is the one breathing it.
Moving right along to Part 2, History's Merciless Financial Lessons.
You know, history proves over and over that dominant superpowers aren't actually defeated by their rivals. They're defeated by the bills of their own conflicts. Just look at this recurring cycle. In 415 BC, Athens was completely undone by hubris during the Sicilian expedition, a ridiculously expensive war of vanity. Jump to the 3rd century AD. Rome couldn't afford to pay its legions honestly anymore, so they literally shaved the silver off the denarius. That created massive inflation that hollowed out their entire commerce. And maybe the most ironic one, 17th century Habsburg Spain bankrupted itself even though they possessed basically all the world's silver from Potosi. Why? Because they poured it straight onto the battlefields of Europe. The lesson here is merciless, guys. No abundance of money survives a state in permanent conflict. The hegemon doesn't die on the battlefield, it dies from the bill.
Section 3, the 7 hidden invoices.
So, if the state is writing a massive check for conflict, how exactly are they collecting those funds from you? Well, war sends out 7 separate invoices, and they're often deferred for an entire generation. And believe me, the state is praying you just ignore these deferred costs. We're talking about demographic bankruptcy, permanent bureaucracy, the silent conscription of your savings, supply chain shocks, groceries turning into geopolitics, the invisible tax of inflation, and the illusion of growth. Let's take a closer look at 2 of the most disruptive ones on that list. First up, demographic bankruptcy. War disproportionately wipes out future workers, taxpayers, and families. It literally erases entire branches from the family tree of the future. The cost isn't just the tragic loss of life on the battlefield. It's the businesses that are never founded, the innovations never discovered, and the children never born. It casts this massive economic shadow that outlasts the peace treaties by decades. Then there's the supply chain. Notice how the stress indicator here just violently surges during periods of geopolitical tension. For decades, our entire world optimized for this amazing just-in-time efficiency. But the second conflict erupts, that global efficiency becomes a really costly illusion. Suddenly, just-in-time becomes just out of stock. Freight costs go through the roof, and society is forced to pay a massive premium for the resilience and redundant supply chains it completely ignored during peacetime. Turns out, the cheapest peacetime supply chain is always the most expensive one in wartime.
Okay, Part 4, the Great Wealth Transfer.
This section right here, this is the absolute core of our explainer today. This is where the deliberate draining of your portfolio really begins, systematically transferring wealth from you, the private saver, straight to the state. To truly grasp this, we have to redefine inflation. I want you to forget whatever you hear on the evening news. According to the analysis, inflation is actually a highly sophisticated state financing mechanism. Governments know that raising direct taxes to cover the true cost of war is basically political suicide. So what do? They borrow what they can't tax, and they print what they can't borrow. It is perfectly designed to drain your private savings and confiscate your purchasing power without ever having to mail you a visible invoice.
Just look at the U.S. Consumer Price Index over the last several decades. Do you see how it aggressively spikes right alongside the Korean War, the escalation in Vietnam, and the Gulf Wars? That is not a coincidence, folks. It's just the mathematical reality of the money supply massively expanding to meet military ambition. The state prints, and your money just buys less.
But of course, no government on Earth actually wants to admit they're inflating away your hard-earned wealth to fund their conflicts. The analysis notes that what it cleverly calls the Ministry of Economic Truth will consistently deflect the blame, whether they're pointing the finger at broken supply chains, greedy corporations, or some convenient foreign boogeyman like we've seen in headlines attributing domestic gas hikes entirely to foreign leaders. Officials will look absolutely anywhere but at their own printing presses.
The crucial takeaway here is that the home front is a battlefield too. The U.S. Misery Index, which combines inflation and unemployment, absolutely confirms it. On this home front battlefield, the ammunition is your purchasing power, and the casualties are household balance sheets. The civilian pays the bill every single time they go to the grocery store.
So, if we summarize this great wealth transfer, you, the private saver, suffer a massive loss of purchasing power, you watch your wages lag terribly behind soaring prices, and you effectively subsidize the government by holding bonds that yield well below the rate of inflation. Meanwhile, the state? They avoid direct tax hikes, successfully monetize their massive debts, and permanently expand their powers. War systematically turns everyday civilians into silent conscripts who keep paying for the conflict long after the victory parades have ended. Section 5. The Illusion of Wartime Growth.
So how does the state use accounting tricks to make you think war is actually good for the economy? We hear this narrative of the wartime boom all the time, right? The state points out, hey, GDP is rising, unemployment is disappearing, industrial output is jumping, but the economic reality is entirely different. This is simply capital consumption masked as growth. Precious resources are being aggressively diverted to produce things that are specifically designed to be blown up. Think about it. Blowing up a bridge and then spending billions to rebuild that exact same bridge doesn't make a nation richer. It just gets you back to zero. Its destruction cleverly recategorized as demand, and it ultimately leads to massive malinvestment and even more future inflation.
And finally, Section 6. Strategies for Wealth Preservation.
All right, so how do we, as smart, focused investors, survive this endless cycle of wealth extraction? Well, the answer starts by looking at what the major global players are doing themselves. Rival powers right now are quietly accumulating gold at a record-staggering pace. Why? Because they know for a fact that fiat currency from a heavily indebted, militarized hegemon simply cannot be taken on trust anymore. Gold and silver directly reflect how war is financed. They are the ultimate traditional shelters when a sovereign decides to monetize its obligations rather than confess it just can't pay them. The required shift in your asset allocation here is clear and it's unforgiving. You must lean deliberately and unapologetically into assets that literally cannot be printed. We're talking about the scarce, the strategic, and the physical. You want to own the producers of scarcity. On the flip side, you absolutely must avoid the deflationary darlings of the past globalized era. A perfect example of what to run away from? Heavy energy consumers, like airlines. When conflict naturally drives up energy prices, that sky-high jet fuel acts as a conditional, absolutely devastating tax that will just crush their margins. If we adapt the ancient wisdom of Sun Tzu for today's investor, it really comes down to 2 steps. Step 1, know the enemy. And the enemy isn't just a foreign army. It's the inflation that confiscates your wealth without a single piece of legislation, and the sudden supply shocks that reprice everything you own. Step 2, know yourself. You have to take a hard look and know if your portfolio is built on hard, unprintable capital, or if it consists of flimsy paper liabilities just waiting to be mobilized and conscripted for the state's survival. Look, in an era of perpetual emergency, trusting the mainstream narrative, that's a luxury you literally cannot afford right now. You need actionable, highly unsentimental guidance to protect your hard-earned wealth from the state's hidden invoices and this silent wealth transfer we've talked about today. To get exactly that kind of guidance, you need to contact the Macro Butler today at info@themacrobutler.com. And be sure to check out their latest insights at https://themacrobutler.com. So let me leave you with this. Will your portfolio survive the true hidden cost of war, or will it be silently conscripted along with everyone else's? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.